My husband told me he was leaving after I cleared his family's $80,000 debt, and his mother just smirked. That smirk, it wasn't just cruel. It was a confession that everything I thought was love had been a lie. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't going to break. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to bury them with the very secrets they thought were safe. They used me like a pawn. But I was about to become the queen. It all started in the university library. I was juggling a ridiculous stack of books, trying to balance my academic ambitions with 2 part-time jobs and barely enough sleep. One wrong step, and the books began to tumble. That's when Jack appeared, smooth, charming, and effortlessly graceful. He caught the top book before it hit the floor and smiled at me like I was the only person in the world. His warm brown eyes crinkled at the corners, and something in his presence made me forget, just for a second, how tired I was. We laughed, made small talk, and before I knew it, we were sharing coffee and inside jokes. Jack was magnetic, the kind of guy who always knew what to say without ever sounding rehearsed. We started dating a week after that first encounter, and within months, I couldn't imagine life without him. He made everything feel lighter, like maybe the stress, the loans, the long hours. None of it mattered as long as we were together. 2 years in, he proposed at the very park where we had our first date. Nothing extravagant, no flash mobs or fancy dinners, just a quiet picnic, a small velvet box, and a shaky-voiced, "Will you marry me?" I didn't even hesitate. I said yes before he could finish the sentence, throwing my arms around him like it was the only thing in the world that made sense. The wedding was small, but perfect. His family showed up dressed to impress, all pearls and politeness. His mother, Eleanor, hugged me and whispered, "Welcome to the family, dear." It sounded sweet at the time. But now that I think about it, her smile never quite reached her eyes. Still, I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe I was becoming part of something real. Jack and I moved into a modest apartment and began our life together. He started his career in finance, full of ambition and promise, while I worked as a high school teacher, doing what I loved. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We dreamed out loud together, buying a house, maybe 2 kids and a golden retriever, Sunday mornings with pancakes and quiet jazz. The first few years felt like magic. We were that couple you see at brunch, laughing over shared waffles and passing glances full of inside jokes. Even when money got tight, and it did, we leaned on each other. Or, at least, I thought we did. It was a Thursday night when everything changed. Jack came home later than usual, his tie loosened, his face pale like he hadn't slept in days. I was cooking dinner, cheap pasta again, stretching every dollar, and I knew, before he even said a word, that something was wrong. He stood in the doorway, silent for a moment, then finally whispered, "Sarah, we need to talk." Those 4 words should have prepared me for what came next, but they didn't. His family, his parents and younger sister, were drowning in debt. Years of bad investments, reckless spending, and sheer denial had finally caught up to them. Bankruptcy loomed. Legal trouble wasn't far behind. They were about to lose their home. "How much?" I asked, already bracing myself. Jack hesitated. $80,000. The air left my lungs. $80,000. That wasn't just a number. That was our future. Our savings, our plans. The little nest egg we'd built piece by piece. That was the house we talked about buying. The baby we almost named. The security I'd clung to every time things felt unstable. Still, I loved him. So I said we'd do it. We emptied every account we had. I sold the diamond earrings my grandmother left me, the only thing I had of hers. Jack took out a second mortgage on our apartment. I picked up weekend tutoring gigs. He started working late, always working late. We barely saw each other anymore. We became two ghosts haunting the same space. But I told myself it was for love, for family, for loyalty. I told myself this sacrifice would bring us closer, not rip us apart. And then we made the final payment. I stood in the bank, confirmation receipt in hand, feeling nothing but exhaustion and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, Jack's family would thank us, that they'd call or send a card, something, anything. But there was nothing, not a word. No call, no thank you. Just silence, like none of it ever happened. I asked Jack if they'd said anything. He shrugged. They're proud people, he muttered. They don't like to talk about money. Give them time. So I did. I gave them time while I counted coupons at the grocery store, while I skipped lunch at school to save a few bucks, while Jack stayed out later, and later with excuses that stopped making sense. That's when I noticed it. Something had shifted. Jack wasn't just tired. He was elsewhere. His eyes didn't light up when he looked at me anymore. His laughter had gone dry, mechanical. The man I fell in love with, the one who caught my falling books and made me believe in fairy tales. He was disappearing. Or maybe he was already gone. And all I could think, as I watched him drift further away, was, I gave everything to save your family. And now, I'm losing mine. It happened on a quiet afternoon. I was in the kitchen, standing barefoot on cold tile, staring into a half-empty fridge, trying to figure out how to stretch canned beans and a carton of eggs into dinner. Jack walked in like he didn't belong to this life anymore. He didn't take off his coat, didn't look me in the eye. Sarah, he said flatly, we need to talk. There was no hesitation, no sadness, just a dull, practiced tone, like he'd already made up his mind. I'm leaving. Just like that. I can't do this anymore, he added, as if that made it better. The stress, the pressure, I need a fresh start. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My hands were still on the fridge door. My mind raced to catch up with what he was saying, but it was all static. I had sacrificed everything for him, for his family, for us, and now, this? But we did this together, I managed to whisper. We gave up everything. We can rebuild. There's no we anymore, Sarah. He said it like it meant nothing, like we had never shared a life, like I hadn't just gutted my future to save his past. I watched him pack a single bag like he'd been ready for weeks. I asked him one last question, even though I already knew the answer. What about your family? What about the debt we paid off? He paused for the briefest second, his hand on the doorknob. There was a flicker, regret maybe, or guilt. But then, it vanished. They'll be fine, he said. You should talk to them. And then he was gone. Gone like everything we built didn't matter. Gone like love was just a phase. I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes? Hours? My body didn't work. My heart didn't feel real. But eventually, I picked up the phone and called the number I knew by heart. Eleanor answered. Jack's mother, cool and composed as ever. Hello? Eleanor, it's Sarah. Jack. He just left. He told me to talk to you about the debt, about the money we paid. There was a pause, a long one. And then, she laughed. It wasn't the kind of laugh you expect after betrayal. It was soft, cruel, almost entertained. Oh, Sarah, she said, her voice like ice. Did you really think that money bought you a place in this family? We never liked you anyway. Click. The line went dead. Her words echoed in my head, over and over, like a cruel chant. We never liked you anyway. Everything. The savings, the sleepless nights, the pain, It wasn't loyalty. It wasn't love. It was a scam. A long, calculated con, and I was the easiest mark. But as I stood alone in the silence of my hollow apartment, something inside me shifted. The grief didn't fade, but it changed. It hardened. The emptiness filled with something colder, something sharper. Rage. Rage that scorched through my veins like fire, awakening a version of myself I'd never met before. A woman who had nothing left to lose, and therefore, nothing left to fear. They thought this was the end of my story. They thought they could use me, break me, and walk away. They had no idea what I was capable of, but they were about to find out. I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream or beg or break things. I just sat there, in the dark, staring at the door he walked out of. My entire life, my marriage, my savings, my trust, had vanished with a suitcase and a lie. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was done being afraid. Grief had cracked me open, but what was growing in its place wasn't weakness. It was something colder, sharper, more dangerous. I wasn't going to pick up the pieces of Sarah Thompson. I was going to build something new from the wreckage. So I buried her, the teacher, the wife, the fool. And I created someone else entirely, Samantha Taylor. She was everything Sarah wasn't. Confident, calculated, unapologetic. I studied women who moved through the world like they owned it, how they dressed, how they spoke, how they made men twice their size sit down and shut up with a glance. I changed my hair, my voice, my walk. I bought a tailored wardrobe that screamed money, even when it was the last of what I had. But I didn't just change how I looked. I changed what I knew. I dove headfirst into the world Jack once lived in, the world he swore I'd never understand. Finance, investments, power. I watched every video, read every book, took every online course I could find. I studied the markets. I followed trends. I started with small trades, calculated, careful, patient, and I got good, fast. It turned out I had a knack for strategy. And once Samantha had knowledge, she needed access. So I started showing up at charity events, business mixers, gallery openings, the places Jack's family haunted. I kept to the edges at first, observing, taking notes. I knew how they operated, what they valued, who they pretended to be. And slowly, I began to slide into their world. I donated to the right causes, befriended the right people, built a network with a smile and a subtle flex of power. People began to notice me, but they didn't recognize me. To them, I wasn't the woman Jack abandoned. I wasn't the naive teacher who gave up everything and got nothing in return. To them, I was Samantha Taylor, sharp, wealthy, mysterious, and most importantly, useful. They didn't know I was watching. That every handshake, every conversation, every fake laugh was part of a plan. They thought I was just another socialite with a pretty smile and deep pockets. But behind the smile was a storm. And behind the storm was a reckoning. Reinvention was only the beginning. If I was going to take them down, I needed more than charm and a killer wardrobe. I needed facts, receipts, proof that the pristine image the Thompsons projected to the world was nothing more than a polished lie. And I knew just the person who could help me find it. Alex and I went to college together. He used to be the kind of guy who asked too many questions in ethics class. And now, he was a private investigator with a specialty in digging up what people worked hard to bury. We hadn't spoken in years. But when I called and said, "I need help," he didn't hesitate. We met in a quiet coffee shop far from the city, where no one would recognize me. Well, Samantha. I gave him the short version. Ex-wife, betrayal, 80 grand gone, and a gut feeling that Jack's family hadn't just conned me. They'd been doing it for years. "This serious?" he asked, looking up from his notebook. "If even half of what I suspect is true," I said, "then you're about to uncover the story of your career." He nodded slowly. "All right, let's find out who they really are." The next few weeks were a blur of encrypted texts, burner emails, and whispered updates in shadowy corners of restaurants. Alex worked fast, and what he found made my blood run cold. Financial records that didn't add up. Shell companies in strange places. Deals that vanished into thin air. Jack's father had his fingerprints on nearly every shady transaction. But what really made my stomach turn was Uncle Robert. Robert Thompson, Jack's uncle. Eccentric, reclusive, estranged from the family. He died 5 years ago in what was ruled an accidental fall. But there were whispers, little things that didn't sit right. Insurance policies cashed in too quickly. Witnesses who suddenly stopped talking. And the kicker? His death lined up perfectly with the start of the family's financial collapse. It was all too neat, too clean, too convenient. I started compiling everything, every article, every document, every damning detail, into a secret dossier. Not digital, not traceable. Printed copies only. Labeled and locked away. The kind of file that, if dropped in the right hands, could ruin lives. And I wasn't finished. The more Alex found, the more I realized this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about exposing a legacy built on lies, theft, and possibly something darker. The Thompsons had no idea that while they were sipping champagne and clinging to their fake smiles, I was building a bomb, one piece of paper at a time. I waited a full year before I made my first move. 1 year to the day since Jack walked out of our apartment, leaving behind nothing but broken trust and an $80,000-sized hole in my soul. But now I had something far more valuable. The truth. I didn't go straight to the authorities. Not yet. That would come later. First, I needed a spark. Something loud, something public. So I contacted Janet Moore, an ambitious journalist with a nose for corruption and a hunger for headlines. We met under the radar, just two women chatting in a crowded cafe. I handed her a plain USB drive and said only one thing. "You're going to want to verify everything on this before you publish. But when you do, make it loud." She did. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning. Front page, bold headline. The Thompsons exposed. Financial fraud, tax evasion, embezzlement, and a suspicious death tied to their wealth. It was like striking a match in a room full of gasoline. By noon, the story had gone national. By evening, every major news outlet was covering the scandal. Stockholders panicked. Investigations were launched. People who once kissed the ground the Thompsons walked on were suddenly deleting their photos with them from social media. And I watched it all unfold, with a glass of wine in one hand and my phone in the other, waiting. It didn't take long. My phone buzzed just past midnight. Unknown number. But I knew who it was before I even answered. "Sarah," Jack growled. "Or should I say Samantha now?" I didn't say a word. "You think you're clever?" he snapped. "You think you can just waltz back into our lives and destroy everything we've built? You have no idea what you're doing." "Oh, Jack," I said, my voice calm, almost amused. "I know exactly what I'm doing." There was a pause on the other end, a crack in his tone. "What do you want? Money? Is that it? You want your precious 80 grand back?" "No," I replied, letting every syllable cut through the silence. "I want justice. I want the truth out in the open. And most of all, I want you to understand exactly how it feels. To lose everything." Another pause. But this time I heard it. The fear. The helplessness. The realization that this wasn't a bluff. "Please," he said quietly, like the Jack I used to know. "Whatever you think you're doing, it's not too late. We can talk. Fix this." But it was too late. It had been too late the moment he chose them over me. I ended the call without another word and stared at my reflection in the dark window. The war had officially begun. And that was only my first strike. Getting my hands on proof was one thing. Using it? That was something else entirely. The Thompsons were on edge, paranoid, flailing behind closed doors while trying to keep their smiles straight for the public. But I knew the cracks were there, and I knew exactly where to push. I got an invitation to a gala at their estate, a pathetic attempt to polish their image while the walls were caving in. As Samantha Taylor, I was now the kind of woman who got invites to places like that. Generous, wealthy, charming, just what they needed for good PR. I RSVP'd with a smile. That night, I arrived in a black dress tailored to perfection, a diamond watch glinting on my wrist, and a purpose sharper than any knife in their silver drawer. I didn't waste time. While the champagne flowed and Eleanor pretended to be everyone's favorite matriarch, I excused myself, slipped upstairs, and found my way to Jack's father's study. The door was locked, but I came prepared. A tiny lockpick set hidden in my clutch did the trick. Inside, the room was everything I expected: rich wood, the smell of old money and new lies. I moved fast, knowing I didn't have long. File cabinets, drawers, nothing substantial. Until I spotted the painting. Behind it, a safe. Classic. Predictable. I tried the obvious first, his anniversary date with Eleanor. It clicked open on the first try. Inside were the final puzzle pieces I needed. Bank documents, wire transfers, notes on the offshore accounts, even physical records linking them to fraudulent charities and shady shell companies. I took photos of everything, every page, every line. I was just closing the safe when I heard voices, Jack and his father, arguing just outside the door. I barely had time to duck behind the curtain before they came in. "She shouldn't be here," Jack was saying. "It doesn't feel right." "She's just another investor," Richard hissed back. "Don't be stupid. Smile, shake her hand, and get through tonight. We can't afford any more mistakes." When they finally left, I slipped out, heart pounding, and made my way back to the gala, like nothing had happened. And that's when I saw her. Eleanor. We locked eyes across the ballroom, and for a moment, there was something almost human in her expression. Recognition, confusion, then cold calculation. She approached flanked by her usual entourage, voice coated in sugar. "Well, well," she purred. "Look who crawled out of the shadows. Sarah, isn't it? Jack's little mistake." I smiled, slow and steady. "Eleanor," I said, voice like ice. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else. My name is Samantha Taylor." I extended a manicured hand, letting her eyes fall to the diamond watch Jack once bought me. "You and I haven't officially met, but I've heard so much about you and your family's ventures." Her grip faltered, her expression cracked, just for a second. Then she turned and fled into the crowd. I stayed long enough to be seen, then disappeared into the night. The very next morning, I handed everything, every file, every photo, every transaction, to the journalist who broke the first story, and to the FBI. 2 days later, it all came crashing down. The raid happened during a board meeting. I wasn't there to see it, at first. But I got a call from Eleanor herself. An invitation. One last family gathering. I arrived just as the FBI agents were storming the building. Executives in cuffs. Jack standing frozen, white-knuckled at the end of the table. His father shouting, His mother, silent, steely, eyes burning into mine. I stepped forward, slow and calm, dossier in hand, laid it down on the table. "My name," I said, voice cutting through the chaos, "is Sarah Thompson. Some of you may remember me as Jack's wife. Others know me as Samantha Taylor. Today I stand before you in my true role, the architect of your downfall." Gasps, panic, denials. Jack moved toward me, but Eleanor stepped in front of him, her voice low and bitter. "Let her speak." I looked him in the eyes one last time. "You threw me away like I was nothing," I said, "but you forgot one thing. I don't stay broken. I rebuild. And now, I ruin." The agents began calling names. Handcuffs clicked shut. One by one, the Thompsons were led away, their empire collapsing under the weight of their own secrets. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I just watched. Because this wasn't revenge. This was justice. When the doors closed behind them, when the flashing lights faded and the headlines stopped screaming, I was left with silence. I had won. I'd dismantled a legacy, exposed the rot that festered behind the Thompson name. I had delivered the justice they never thought would come. And yet, I felt hollow. Revenge had kept me alive. It gave me purpose when I had nothing left. But it was never meant to be a destination. It was just the road I had to walk to get back to myself. In the days that followed, I stayed quiet. I avoided the cameras, ignored the interview requests, and let the world talk while I listened. To myself. To the ache beneath the triumph. To the question I didn't know how to answer. Now what? It was Alex, my old friend, who helped me find it. He showed up at my apartment, just like he had when this all began. He didn't say much, just looked at me and said, "You did it. Now it's time to figure out who you want to be." So I did. I reached out to Janet, the journalist. Not for another expose, but for something different. We started writing a book together. Not just about the Thompsons, but about what happens when people are betrayed by the very ones they trust most. It wasn't just my story. It was for every voice that had been silenced. Every victim told to move on quietly, while the powerful moved on freely. But I still wanted to do more. So I started a foundation. The Sarah Thompson Foundation. A safe haven for victims of corporate fraud, whistleblowers, and anyone who felt powerless against the machine. We offered resources, legal aid, and, most importantly, someone who would actually listen. And slowly, I started to feel like Sarah again. Not the naive teacher, not the betrayed wife, but someone stronger. Someone who understood pain and used it as fuel, not a crutch. The woman who once clung to love as her compass now held something different in her hands. Justice. A year after the Thompsons fell, I stood on a stage at a charity gala, surrounded by people who didn't know the whole story, only that I'd somehow turned ashes into impact. I looked out at them, cleared my throat, and spoke from the heart. "I used to believe in love," I said. "I thought it could fix anything, heal anything, survive anything. But love can be blind, it can be reckless, and sometimes it can betray you in ways you never imagined. Now, I believe in something else. I believe in justice. I believe in truth. And I believe that when someone tries to burn you down, you don't just rise from the ashes. You build something stronger in their place." The applause was soft at first, then rose like a wave. As I stepped away from the mic, I caught my reflection in a nearby window. No longer Samantha. Not entirely Sarah. Just me. Whole. Unshaken. Unbreakable. And finally, free. If you were Sarah, would you forgive? Or would you go full revenge? Subscribe for more real-life betrayals that end with a twist they never saw coming.